there's this narrative out there that childbirth is supposed to be painful and that it is, this intense experience, which there is intensity because your body is going through the most amazing, challenging experience that it probably has ever or will ever go through. But it can be so beautiful and it can be so peaceful and so pain-free, but you have to do the work ahead of time. You can't just step in there and think because you're strong physically that you're going to be able to overcome the physical aspect of this. You have to train every part of your body. So I'm super excited to talk about the fear, tension, pain cycle tonight. What I'm going to be doing and how I'm going to be kind of laying this whole thing out is I'm going to go through the fear, tension, pain cycle and what that actually is. And then I'm going to work to how you actually move past this to go into the next cycle, which is confidence, comfort, and control. So let's just jump right in. And I have, if you have not seen my post from earlier, I am going to be kind of referencing those diagrams, which is, it looks like this if you haven't seen it. So take a look at that and save it, screenshot it, do something so that you guys understand the seriousness of this. Because listen, so with that being said, fear. So the fear, tension, pain cycle exists because it talks about the fact that fear, which lives a lot of times in our brains, can impact all other parts of our body. And so what that means is, just as at a high level, that fear, when you carry fear, that fear can actually become a reality because it'll tell your body to be fearful of this thing, which causes your body to become tense. And when you're tense, if you're clenched up like this and something happens, it is going to be extremely painful because you're so tense and your body is so tense and it's not relaxed and able to flow or surrender to whatever it is that's happening, which leads us to the pain part of this cycle, which says you are going to experience pain as a result of the fear and tension that come from whatever the source of this is. So how does that actually play out in pregnancy or in labor? So when we get pregnant, we probably are going through some level of different emotions. We might be excited, we might be scared, we might be anxious, we might be overjoyed, we might be confused, we might feel lost. There's a lot of things that we're probably experiencing when we get pregnant. And regardless of where you're at, you don't have to be in a joyous place to not have fear. You don't have to be in a low place to carry a lot of fear. It's just a matter of figuring out what those fears are. So fears can be whatever the fear of childbirth that you may have. That could be tearing, that could be a cesarean, that could be maternal mortality, whatever the fear is that you might be carrying about childbirth. It's important that you acknowledge and address those, list them out on paper so that you know what they actually are. Hi, Carmen. Whatever the fear of pain is, if you know or you've heard other people's birth stories before and you hear the horror stories, or you're just thinking about childbirth what you see on TV or what you see in movies, but yet you haven't watched or read about a beautiful birth experience, there could be some fear associated with childbirth, with pain, because of the things that you have surrounded yourself with and allowed to seep in and just sit in your mind. When we do have fear, there's this fight or flight response, which is what brings us to the tension. So if you can just think about a car accident. If you are in a car and you're driving or you're stopped and you see that there's going to be a car that crashes into you, you're going to have a fender bender, you're going to crash into a car, you're not stopped soon enough, whatever the case is. When you anticipate that, you become fearful. You're like, oh shoot, I'm about to get in an accident. This is going to be painful. And so what do? You automatically tense up your body. You go into a fight or flight response where you have to do something because you know what's about to happen. You have already made up in your mind, I'm about to get in an accident, or this person is going to hit me, so I have to do something about this. So what ends up happening is we get into this fight or flight response mode, and we do one of two things. We either have to take care of it, fight, or we have to get out of it. And obviously in a car accident situation, there's really only one way that it can happen. It happens and we try to tense up, we try to avoid the pain or the experience from happening. We might try to avoid, turn our car another way, but either way, we're still tense in that situation. And when we become tense, that causes our body to become stiff, becomes difficult to move. It doesn't become fluid, which in a situation like a car accident, if you've ever been in a car accident before, you know that the people who don't know that the car accident is coming, like for example, if you've heard of or seen or read about drunk driving accidents, people who are in drunk driving accidents, a lot of times the driver lives, their body is all over the place, it's fluid, and then the person that they hit sometimes ends up in a fatal situation. And that person could have known, they might not have known, but obviously the details of the car accident, that's obviously a whole different part of the story. But if that person were to have known that this car was about to hit them and they tensed up, they might have had or suffered further or more serious injuries than the drunk driver or the person who was hitting them, because they knew it was coming, they tensed their body up, and it didn't allow their body to move fluidly throughout the car or in the accident, which is the same thing that happens in labor. That person who was fluid, they probably didn't get as much as injured in the car accident. And the person in labor or in birth who just surrenders their body, doesn't tense up after every contraction or as another contraction is coming on, those are the people who typically have a much more positive birth experience and labor experience, because they're like, hey, the contractions are going to happen. If I'm going to tense up, it's just going to make them worse. I know that they're going to happen. Contractions are a part of having a baby. And so I just need to use my toolkit instead of allowing my tense body to take over and not allow me to just labor as I need to labor. And so the tension, when you have that fear and you allow that fear to live there, it leads to you experiencing more tension. And tension in labor actually can cause a tightened pelvic floor. And if you have not seen my previous week's video about pelvic floors, you need to watch that and just learn about your pelvic floor and how that impacts labor and birth and postpartum. But it will create a tightened pelvic floor, and we want it to be relaxed during labor so that we can dilate and progress in labor. It can also decrease the amount of oxytocin if you are tense. It can decrease the amount of oxytocin that is flowing, and we need oxytocin for labor to progress. So we don't want to interfere with anything that's going to bring on that love hormone. But if you're thinking about tension, you're thinking about fear and releasing oxytocin, aka the love hormone, that's kind of like opposite. They're counterproductive, right? So it's very challenging to be releasing this love hormone if you're carrying fear. So we have to choose oxytocin, choose that happy, positive, confident space if we want oxytocin to continue to flow throughout our labor so that we can continue to progress and we don't have a stall labor. And then tension can also decrease your oxygen and blood going to the uterus, which is also true. We need that to happen during labor as well as during pregnancy. And so if we're carrying this fear in labor and our bodies become tense, then it's going to be very challenging for us to have a steady progression. We could experience a stall in labor. We could experience more pain. We could experience ineffective contractions. There's a lot of things that can happen if we just keep our bodies so tense that it's not doing anything else but just bracing itself for whatever is coming ahead. There is research actually on this, and so the research has talked about the fact that fear of childbirth actually has been reported in research and shown to have more pain experienced in labor. So they did a study where they evaluated and followed a bunch of different mamas who were pregnant and just kind of evaluated their different levels of fear as it related to childbirth. Now, the women who went into labor who had more fear of childbirth for whatever their fear was, that they did not handle, deal with, address before they went into labor, those women actually reported that they experienced higher levels of pain than the ones who didn't. Now, the ones who, and we'll go into this in a second, but the ones who were prepared and felt like they were in control of their labor and control of their bodies actually had a much more positive experience and felt and experienced less pain. So this is not just this is a cute little, psychological cycle. This is a real thing, and it's research-based, it's evidence-based, and it has a lot to do with your labor experience. So if you want to have a positive experience, you have to address those fears so that they don't show up, because they will show up if you don't deal with them while you're in the middle of labor. So we have this tension, and when we tense up, like I told y'all before, you're going to experience more pain for whatever is coming your way, which in labor is a contraction. And so that pain, which none of us want to experience in labor, pain-free births exist. But the people who have pain-free births are the people who do this and address this and go through this process to overcome their fears and to become confident in themselves and their bodies and trust their bodies during labor. And so when you have that tension and then you experience that pain as a result of that tension, your body is going to experience more pain, or it's going to perceive that it's experiencing more pain that may not actually be pain. It may be like a intense contraction, or you could even have Braxton Hicks, right? And you can be like, oh my God, that was so painful. But it's not a contraction. And it's not to say that Braxton Hicks are comfortable or enjoyable, but Braxton Hicks are just warm-up contractions, right? And so if we're still carrying this fear of childbirth, every time a Braxton Hicks comes on, you could be experiencing a lot more pain or believing that it's more painful than it actually is, because of whatever you're anticipating going to happen when you go into labor. So you have to make sure that you address these things, you work through them as early as possible, and you figure out ways to switch some of these fears and have the research and the education lined up so that they're not going to run and control your mind while you're in labor. And then the pain also, like when you do experience pain, it's going to validate your fear. So if you're going through like contractions and you're like, I knew contractions were painful. Oh, here comes another one. Yeah, it's painful, it's painful, it's painful. Now you have validated the fact that contractions are painful. They're going to get stronger as time progresses, so on and so forth, but you're not going into labor like they're painful. You're probably not going to believe that they're painful. You're probably just going to validate the fact that, yeah, they're intense, but I never walked into this situation believing that they were painful. That wasn't my fear that they were painful. So I'm not going to probably feel the pain as much as somebody who walks into labor saying that they're painful. So that is the fear, tension, pain cycle, and it's so important that you address the fear so that we don't even get to the pain. And so how do we actually move from this fear, tension, pain cycle to the confidence, control, comfort approach? So instead of that fear, how do we turn the fear into confidence? So the first thing that you can do is address the fact that you have fears. List them out so that you can figure out how to overcome them, so you can do the research to make yourself feel better about those. You can educate yourself on all matters so that when this fear does come up, you have so much more information that's going to override the fear that existed at one point. If you know what to expect, you will be a lot more confident going into birth. Your fears will no longer be as prevalent or as strong because you're like, yeah, I've heard that before. I've read that before. That was a fear of mine, but I know this, and this now about that. And I know what to expect, and I know how to address those things if they happen to me in labor, or if I experience them in labor. And so I'm a lot more confident going into the situation because I'm more confident on knowing how to handle the situation. And then once you become confident, you're going to trust your body. And if your mind and your heart trust your body, that is what is going to allow for you to have this positive birth experience. But if you go into labor and you're like, I don't trust myself, I think it's going to be really painful, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it, then you're absolutely right. That's exactly what's going to happen. You may not be able to handle it. You may not know what to expect. You may not get through it because you've already convinced yourself that you don't trust your body enough to do what it was designed to do. So this all starts and lives up here. And if you don't deal with this up here, your body is going to respond to whatever you have living up in there. And so that's, in order for us to get to that confident space, going from the fear at the top of the cycle to confidence at the top of the cycle, you have to educate yourself. You have to know what to expect. You have to surround yourself and watch and read things that are going to pour things into your mind, pour research, pour evidence, pour information, pour affirmations into your brain that is going to affirm and confirm what you want your birth to look like. And then once you have that confidence, now that's going to make you feel like you have more control. I told y'all earlier, the people who felt like they had more control, even if they didn't, they might not even truly had control in labor, but they had perceived control, which made them feel like they had control, which allowed them to have a much more positive experience. So the more confident you are, the more education you have, the more knowledge you have, the more experience, practice you have done, just preparing your body for labor, the more control you're going to feel in labor. And so instead of becoming tense, right, we now can replace that with control to say, I'm going to control my breathing, I'm going to control my body, I'm going to control the position that I'm in, I'm going to control where my mind goes, and there's no longer this tension. I get to surrender to the process. I have control whether I surrender or I don't surrender to the process, and that will make the difference. If we are learning and we get into this mindset of just riding the wave of labor, I can ride the wave of this contraction. I can do anything for 60 seconds. It's a whole different mindset than like, oh my God, I'm going to be in labor for 18 hours or 20 hours or whatever. Like moving from that to being like, I can do anything for 60 seconds. You can do anything for 60 seconds, but you have to practice it and you have to tell yourself that you can do anything for 60 seconds. So once we have that control, then we will experience more comfort. Instead of having pain now, we get to experience comfort in labor. And not to say that you're just going to be laying back and smiling through every contraction. That may not be your situation. But you're probably going to experience a much more positive and comfortable labor versus a painful one. There is a thing called pain-free birth. People have had pain-free births. People will tell you, yeah, it was intense, but I was not in pain. And I'm going to share a birth story with y'all tomorrow, a home birth story. So make sure you guys check that out on my Instagram, of just this mama's birth experience. This is her third child, her first home birth. And she'll tell you, I had no pain. I had so much control over my mind, and I had so much control over my birthing process that yes, it was intense, but I was in control the whole time. So I was comfortable. I was comfortable with the whole experience. It did not overtake me. I was in control of what happened. And that is going to cause you and allow you to feel or experience less pain. It's going to allow you to experience a more positive birth experience, and you're going to have more oxytocin, because if you're in control, if you feel comfortable, if you feel confident in all the things that you're doing, your body is going to respond to that, and it's going to release oxytocin, which is going to allow your labor to continue to progress. So y'all have to do the work now. If you're pregnant, if you're thinking about becoming pregnant, it doesn't matter where you are in your birth, you have to make sure that you educate yourself. Being on this, watching this over and over again is a good first start. If you haven't taken a childbirth education class, you need to do that, because you need to know from start to finish what to expect in labor. You need to know how to prepare your body. You need to be around other people who are pregnant. You need to be talking to other people who have the same mindset as you. You need to create boundaries for yourself so that you will not allow all the external fears and factors to come in and like mess you all up and take you out of your zone. If that happens, they need to go. Period. Point blank. The people, the news, the social media, whatever is causing you anxiety or pain or fear, that has to go, and we have to replace it with the things that are going to bring you confidence and make you feel empowered to give birth. There's so much that goes into this, and obviously we're just hitting the top of the iceberg, but there's so much work to be done. And I talk a lot about this. We do an entire class on preparing your mind for birth in my Work Your Birth course. So if you're needing more support, if you want to go through this, if you want to learn what to expect from birth and how to prepare your entire body, not just your mind, not just how to move, not just how to breathe, but like how to truly prepare your entire body, you need to check out my Work Your Birth course. It is going to take you from fearful to empowered and confident in 4 weeks. We meet every week. All the mamas who are in the same class, they build a bond, they get to support each other, they get to celebrate when they have their babies with each other. It's amazing, and you get to build that community, because that's another part of this. It's very fearful and scary to go through birth and pregnancy by yourself. So you need to make sure that you are surrounding yourself with other people who are going through the same thing as you, who can be there alongside of you, and you can talk to about your experiences, who are probably experiencing the same thing as you, and talk to them about how they're overcoming some of those fears. I hope this was helpful. I'm very passionate about preparing the mind for birth, because your brain will absolutely tell your body what to do. So if you go into labor, even though you may not think that you are experiencing something, if you go into labor and you have not prepared your mind or your brain, your body will react to that, because it's going to go all out of whack and it's going to get tense because you don't know what to expect. So this is the fear, tension, pain cycle, and happy birthing.